The winter of 1879 came to the Montana Territory like a sentence handed down by something that had no interest in appeals. It came early, the first hard snow falling in October, which the old-timers said was a bad sign, and which the calendar confirmed was unusual. And it came heavy, the kind of heavy that settles into the landscape and changes it fundamentally, turning familiar ground into something that requires relearning. The passes closed early. The roads between homesteads became suggestions rather than facts. The world contracted, as it always does in Montana winters, to the size of what you could see from your window and reach before the cold became dangerous. In the small valley, 12 miles east of the town of Harlan, where a creek called Bitter Run wound through a stand of cottonwoods that were now bare and ice-crusted, there was a homestead. It was not a large homestead. A main house of timber and chinked log, solid but modest, with 2 windows facing south and a porch that needed new boards on the left side and had needed them for 2 years. A barn that was better maintained than the house because the animals in it were the economic foundation of everything, and therefore received the attention that the house sometimes didn't. A root cellar dug into the hillside behind. A woodpile along the east wall of the house that was, as of this particular November evening, perhaps 2/3 of what it should have been for a Montana winter. The woman who lived there was named Ruth Callan. She was 54 years old, though she moved like someone who had not informed her body of this number, and therefore her body had no particular opinion about it. She was lean and strong in the way of people who have spent 30 years doing physical work without much interruption. Gray hair worn up in the practical way of someone who thinks about hair approximately once a day and for no longer than it takes to pin it. A face that had lines in it, not the lines of unhappiness, but the lines of weather and attention, and the particular expressiveness of a face that has spent decades feeling things fully without apology. She had been a widow for 4 years. Her husband, James Callan, had died in the winter of 1875. A fever that came on fast and moved faster. The kind that the doctor in Harlan said he had seen before, and that he said with the look of a man who had seen it before and had not been able to do anything about it on any of those occasions. James had been 51 years old and had been a good man in the way that Ruth thought about goodness. Not as the absence of fault, because James had faults enough, but as a fundamental orientation toward doing right that persisted even when it was inconvenient. She missed him every day. Not in the acute way of the first year. That particular pain had softened as people told her it would, which she had not believed them about at the time and had been surprised to find was true. But in the way of a physical absence that you keep reaching for out of habit and that is not there. The other side of the bed. The sound of his boots on the porch. The particular way he had of sitting at the table in the evenings reading by lamplight, present and quiet and entirely himself. 4 years alone. She had managed. She was good at managing. Better, it turned out, than she had known she was, because James had always been the one who managed and she had always been the one who made things work. And it turned out that making things work was the larger part of the job. Her son Thomas was in Denver. He wrote every month, good letters, detailed and affectionate, full of news about his work at the bank and his wife Clara and their 2 children whom Ruth had met once and who were in the photographs Thomas sent, growing at the alarming speed that children grow when you are not watching them daily. Thomas had asked her in every letter for 3 years to come to Denver, to sell the homestead, to live with them or near them. Ruth had not done this. She was not sure she could explain to Thomas's satisfaction why not. The homestead was not easy. The winters were hard. The work was relentless. She was 54 years old and her left knee hurt in the cold, and the woodpile was 2/3 of what it should be. But the homestead was where she and James had built something, where her hands knew every board and every fence post and every stubborn patch of ground, where the creek sound came through the window in spring and the cottonwoods went gold in October before the snow came, where James was buried under the big cottonwood at the east edge of the property, and where Ruth went every morning with coffee she didn't always drink but always brought. This was home. She was staying. The storm that arrived on the evening of November 14th was not unusual for Montana in November, which is to say it was extraordinary by any other standard. It came from the northwest with the sudden decision of weather that has been building for days and has finally made up its mind. By 4 in the afternoon, the sky was the color of iron. By 5, the wind was moving the snow horizontally. By 6, the world outside Ruth's south-facing windows had become a white nothing that contained no information about distance or direction. Ruth had her fire built up before the worst of it hit. She had her animals in the barn, 3 horses, 11 cattle, the chickens in their enclosed pen attached to the barn's east wall. She had soup on the stove, a good thick one, venison and root vegetables and barley, the kind of soup that a Montana winter requires rather than merely suggests. She had her lamp trimmed and lit, and she had her mending on the table, and she had, all things considered, the particular settled feeling of someone who is prepared for a difficult thing and is ready for it. She was not prepared for the knock on the door. It came at 7:30, a sound that she first took for the wind, which was making all manner of sounds against the house, and then identified as something more deliberate. She set down her mending. She went to the door. She opened it. The man on her porch was covered in snow, not dusted, covered, the way a thing gets covered when it has been in a blizzard for a long time without shelter. His dark hair was matted with ice. His coat, a heavy wool thing that had been adequate for something but was not adequate for this, was soaked through. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and he was holding onto the porch post with both hands in the way of a man who has been moving on wool alone for the last hour, and is now, having found something solid to hold, unsure whether the wool is going to continue. He looked at her. His eyes were dark, very dark, set in a face that was simultaneously young and old in the way of someone who has seen a great deal in a short time. He had a beard of several days crusted with ice at the edges. There was a cut above his left eyebrow visible through the ice and the snow that had bled and dried and bled again. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, with the careful enunciation of a man using his last reserve of functioning, "I saw your light." Ruth looked at him for approximately 2 seconds. Then she stepped back and held the door open. "Come in," she said. He came in. He sat in the chair she directed him to, the one nearest the stove, and dripped steadily onto her floor, and she got his coat off him, which took a while because his hands were not working well. And she hung it by the fire and got blankets from the chest and put them around him and went back to the stove. She ladled soup into a bowl. She brought it to the table and sat across from him and held it out with a spoon. He looked at the bowl, then at her. There was something in his expression that was hard to read. Not gratitude exactly, because gratitude is a social response and he was somewhere below the level where social responses live. Something more fundamental. The look of a creature that has been cold for a very long time and has just encountered warmth and is still in the process of believing it. "Can you hold it?" she said. He reached out and took the bowl. His hands were shaking badly. She kept her hands under the bowl until she was sure he had it, then let go slowly. He ate. She sat across from him and watched and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say, and she had learned long ago that silence is often the most practical thing available. He ate the whole bowl. She got him another. He ate that one more slowly, which she took as a good sign. The second bowl meant the body was beginning to think about something other than survival. When it was done, he sat with the empty bowl in his hands and looked at the table. "Thank you," he said. "There's bread," she said. And then, in the tone of someone who is not offering but informing, "There's bread." She cut him 2 thick slices and put them on the table with butter. He ate those too. His name, he told her, was Daniel Holt. He was 32 years old, though he looked older tonight, in the way that extreme cold and exhaustion add years that sleep and warmth will later subtract. He had been riding from Harlan toward the Pemberton Ranch, 15 miles to the east, where he had work waiting. He had misjudged the storm, had thought he could make the Pemberton place before it closed in, which was the kind of miscalculation that the Montana winter was entirely indifferent to. His horse had gone lame 5 miles back. He had left the horse in a stand of timber, tied with what shelter the trees provided, and walked. "The horse," Ruth said. "I know," he said. "I couldn't bring her in this." "We'll go in the morning," Ruth said. "The storm should break by dawn." "Where exactly?" He described the timber stand. She knew it. A stand of cottonwood and pine about 2 miles northeast, the last cover before the open ground that ran to the Pemberton fence line. "She's good-natured," he said, with the particular tone of a man talking about an animal he cares about. She won't have panicked. We'll get her, Ruth said. She said it with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who has decided a thing and sees no reason to discuss it further. Daniel Holt looked at her. You don't know me, he said. No, she said. I don't. You let me in anyway. Ruth looked at the window where the storm was pressing its white face against the glass. It was 7:30 at night in a blizzard, she said. What else was I going to do? He was quiet for a moment. Some people would have done something else, he said. Some people, Ruth said, are going to answer for that themselves. I'd rather answer for what I did. She gave him James's old room. She did this without particular ceremony, changed the sheets which she kept clean out of habit even for a room no one used, put a candle on the table, showed him where the wash basin was. He looked at the room with the expression of someone who has been given more than they expected and is not quite sure how to hold it. This was your husband's, he said. He wasn't asking. There was something in the room that told him. The particular quality of a space that was personal once and is now preserved. It was, she said. He passed 4 years ago. I'm sorry. Thank you, she said, the same way she always said it. Now sleep. We'll go for the horse at first light. She went to her own room and lay down and listened to the storm work itself out against the house. And sometime before midnight the wind dropped and the quality of the silence changed in the way that tells you the worst is over. She was up at 5. He was already up. She found him in the kitchen, her kitchen, which he had entered carefully with the consideration of someone in another person's space, with the fire stoked and the coffee on. He had found the coffee on the shelf and the pot on the hook, and he had made it with the efficiency of someone accustomed to functioning in unfamiliar kitchens in early mornings, which told her something about the kind of life he'd had. He looked up when she came in. I hope that was all right, he said, meaning the coffee. It's more than all right, she said. She got 2 cups. She poured. They sat at the table in the pre-dawn quiet and drank and looked at the window where the storm had become the steel grey of first light on new snow. How deep do you think, he said. 2 feet on the flat, she said. More in the drifts. We'll take the big horse. He's got the legs for it. You don't have to come, he said. I know the timber stand, she said. You described it, but you were half frozen when you did it. I know exactly where it is. She looked at him. Besides, it's my horse we're taking and my land we're crossing. I'd say I do have to come. He looked at her for a moment with the expression he'd had several times the previous night, the one she couldn't entirely place, that had something of appraisal in it and something of something else she hadn't named yet. All right, he said. They went out into the white morning. The mare was exactly where he'd said, in the cottonwood stand, tied to the largest tree, standing in snow up to her knees with the patient, slightly aggrieved expression of a horse that has spent an uncomfortable night and would like it acknowledged. She was uninjured. The lameness had been a stone bruise, serious enough to stop travel in that weather, but not permanently damaging. Ruth examined the hoof with the practiced efficiency of a woman who has been the primary horse care on a homestead for 4 years and knew what she was looking at. She'll be fine, she said. A few days rest. Daniel was standing in the snow, stroking the mare's neck with the particular relief of a person reunited with something they'd been genuinely worried about. She's got a good constitution, he said. She does, Ruth agreed. What's her name? June, he said. Ruth looked at the mare, who had turned her head and was looking at Daniel with the warm attention of an animal that has decided its person is satisfactory. That's a good name, Ruth said. They brought June back through the snow, Ruth leading the big horse and Daniel walking beside June. And by the time they reached the homestead, the morning had gone from gray to white to the particular sharp blue of a Montana day after new snow. The sky so clear, it seemed like something that had been cleaned. He stayed 3 days. This was not entirely planned. June needed rest. The roads were impassable for another day. And Ruth's wood pile, which she had been managing but which had been concerning her, needed attention. Daniel noticed the woodpile on the first morning. He didn't say anything about it. He simply, after June was settled in the barn and breakfast was finished, went out with Ruth's axe and walked through the afternoon with the steady, unhurried efficiency of a man doing a thing that needs doing. By evening, the woodpile was right. Ruth stood and looked at it. "You didn't have to do that," she said. It was the thing she said, apparently, the thing people said when someone had done something for them that they were not obligated to do. Daniel looked at her with a faint expression that might, in a different man, have been a smile. "I saw your light," he said. She understood that he was returning her own logic to her, that she had let him in because it was what the situation required, and he had split her wood because it was what the situation required, and that these were the same kind of act. She almost smiled. "Supper's at 6, she said, and went inside. Those 3 days had a quality that Ruth did not try to analyze why they were happening, because she was not a woman who analyzed things while they were happening. She analyzed them afterward, in the evenings, in the particular quiet of a house that was back to being a single person's house, where there was space for thought. They worked. That was mostly what happened. Ruth had her animals and her household and the accumulated small tasks of a homestead after a major snow. Daniel worked alongside her, not as a guest who was helping, but as someone who assessed what needed doing and did it, which was a different thing and one she noticed. They talked in the intervals between work, with the gradual ease of people who are building something conversational from the ground up and who are in no particular hurry. He was from Missouri originally, a farm boy who had come west at 19 for reasons he summarized as wanting to see what was out there, which Ruth understood as a young person's version of something that she had a more precise name for at 54, which was the need to find out who you are when the context of your origin is removed. He had worked cattle drives, mining camps, ranch work in Wyoming and Idaho. He had been on his way to the Pemberton place for a winter's work. He asked her about James, not intrusively, in the way of someone who has noticed the presence of a life in a house and is genuinely curious about it. She told him the good parts and the honest parts, which were different categories that sometimes overlapped. He listened the way that certain people listen, which is to say completely, which is rarer than it should be. He asked about Thomas, whom he had deduced from the photograph on the mantelpiece. She told him about Denver and the letters and the gentle sustained pressure to leave. "Why don't you?" he asked, directly, without judgment. "Because this is home," she said, also directly. "Because James is buried here. Because this ground knows my hands and I know it. Because in Denver, I would be Thomas's mother and I love Thomas deeply, but I am also Ruth Callan and Ruth Callan lives here." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "That's a good answer," he said. "It's the true one," she said.